Thanks very much for joining us for episode 25 of InTek Freight and Logistics, the podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my co-host for this edition, InTek President Shelley Austin. On this episode, we look at retail shipping and how to make it more sustainable. Let's get started. With deliveries deluging neighborhoods across the country as we record this episode shortly after Black Friday and Cyber Monday, how are carriers and retailers addressing sustainability, especially as they reach that final mile stage? We'll take a look at a platform aimed at doing just that, plus the retail and e-commerce landscape this holiday season with Mike Robinson, head of retail solutions and founding member of the Eighth Notch. Mike, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
So first off, tell us a little bit about your background in the supply chain space.
Yeah, I would be lying to you if I told you I was a supply chain practitioner. I'm not. I'm a supply chain consumer, right? So my time in retail for 25 years was about driving as much demand as possible that somebody else had to figure out a way of delivering. And in that time, I grew very appreciative of the discipline because I didn't quite understand it until I understood that I was creating a problem for people. I mean, I started my career fairly early on at understanding how to drive demand. But when I got to Macy's, it really was about how to ensure a great customer experience. And part of that customer experience included how you got the product to the customer in a timely manner and in a quality manner. We started out with one distribution center, and by the time I left, we had 4 mega centers that were 1 million square feet apiece, plus using 800 of our stores to fulfill all of it. So I gained an appreciation. I don't think I fully understood the complexities associated with it, but it's something that I know is absolutely imperative. And then as we turn the page into the second stage of my career, and we'll talk about the Eighth Notch a little bit later, I've gotten a little bit deeper as it relates to final mile.
So yeah, talking about the retail aspect in particular, we're obviously in the midst of holiday shopping season. What was that like for you when that comes up on the calendar, and what is it still like for retailers?
Well, now that I'm not in it, I can actually enjoy Thanksgiving, right? and there are many people I know that have over the last 5 days have probably not slept a great deal as they've tried to understand the onslaught. Holiday is I still think it's the World Series, it's the Super Bowl, it's the World Cup, it's the Olympics for retailers. It's where you are measured more during holiday than you're measured at any other time during the year in terms of how you satisfy the customer, how you drive your top line and bottom line, and how you actually operate as a company. It's changed, right? I mean, we used to look at this as the Turkey 5, right? From Thanksgiving to Cyber Monday. And then it became about Black Friday week and Cyber week. And now, and I think it was very, very acute this past year. As soon as you took down your Halloween stuff, people were screaming holiday already on November 1st. And many retailers were already at a Black Friday mode in terms of preparation and discounting and trying to drive sales trying to capture as many sales as early as possible. It's also changed in terms of the consumer mindset. I mean, holiday used to be about you buy for others. Now it's about buy for others, but buy for yourself as well, because the deal structure is different, right? It's probably where you're going to get the best deals you'll find all year long, or so the retailers will tell you that, right? And so it becomes the psychology game associated with how do you get people to feel good about the price they're paying, the discount they're getting, and the service that they're receiving as well. And then there's this constant pressure as you move forward, in terms of how does the retailer, work through the situation of, I got to blow out inventory, right? And I don't want to get into clearance in January if I can avoid it. I really want to, blow it out. I want to get my best stuff sold out right now. And the reality is this year's a little bit different, given that you've got a lot of inventory that's been left over from last year that still needs to get through the channel. And you've got some amount of new, but maybe not as much new as the consumer is expecting. But it's still, I mean, I still get nightmares about it. I still think about, some of the heroic things I watched people do during it. But it's something that if you've never been a retailer and gone through this period, it's hard to explain to people. Though I can tell you, my family, who I spent Thanksgiving with, they said, you're a very different person now than you were 5 years ago, right? In terms of we actually see you and you're not constantly checking your phone to see if something is working or not working.
Mentioning the inventory in particular, because that's certainly something that affects the freight and logistics industry. That was an issue throughout the last couple of years, getting that inventory right-sized. Does it feel like that backlog is pretty much gone and we're starting to get more towards normal on that end again?
Yeah, I think we're close, right? I think that many retailers did a pretty good job during the spring and summer to try and blow through that inventory. But high inflation, two active wars, a pending election, there's a lot of bad news out there that people have to fight through in order to feel good about purchasing something, and in many cases purchasing things that they want, not necessarily that they need. So I think we're in a better position. I'm not sure there's as much newness in the channel right now as people would like. But, I've been crawling through all the analyst reports over the last few days about last week. It seems like we're in a pretty good position. It'll be interesting because it's a longer holiday period. It's a 5-week period. You've got an extra weekend right before Christmas. So, that there's an elongated time frame that people can play chicken on. So it'll be interesting. I think the inventory thing is better than it's been. I think we'll be in a much better position next year.
So, Mike, I find it interesting because you say your family said it's they actually saw you this time, which is a good thing on the holiday. When we were celebrating our holiday and it was coming up on the Black Friday, it seemed like it just wasn't the same as what it used to be, which it isn't the same. But my question with that is, it used to be that everybody would get up at 4 a.m. They go stand in lines in front of a warehouse or a DC or a store front. And I related it back to the Cabbage Patch days. I guess that dates me, right? Everybody's in line to get the latest Cabbage Patch. But, with
Sure.
the way it's extended now, and even with the pandemic where everybody is so accustomed to online shopping, and then you even mentioned it, it's a whole week. It's not just Black Friday, it's a whole week. And then you got Cyber Monday, and you probably see it better than anybody else. Is it really that active on that particular day? Or are people kind of fizzling out on the whole allure of Black Friday because you can get those deals the other days as well?
Yeah, I think there's many ways to create urgency, right? You create urgency around time, or you create urgency around a quantity, right? Or you create urgency around, it's a Black Friday deal, but today's deal might be different than tomorrow's Black Friday deal, right? And so, I think the retailers have clearly lost, the event component of it, but they still have the opportunity of being able to change the structure inside the event as much as they want and create urgency that way and create, jeopardy in the consumer's mind, right? If I don't buy now, it might not be there later. I had that experience where it was like, there was something I clearly wanted to buy on Black Friday. I forgot to Saturday, and I'm like, well, let me wait until Cyber Monday. I bet it's still there. It wasn't. It was gone, right? And they no longer offered it at the price at the discount. Now, I'm going to wait them out. I'm pretty sure if they have inventory, that I'll find a way to be able to get it at the discounted rate that I wanted to get. But it'll be much later in the season. And so there's a different time component here associated with. I don't know if anybody. Maybe your family enjoyed getting up at 4 a.m. and rushing a store. Right? My family didn't. Right? Nobody enjoyed that. The last thing that we all wanted to do was jump in the family truckster and go to the local mall, right?
Right.
And fight with people. And now it's about getting up. You get up, you do your shopping, you do, and you can do it. And you can pretty much buy anything you want digitally now, right? You don't need to go to a physical place unless you truly want to touch it, right? And I think that there is value in the omni-channel component associated with it. But I think you're right. It's a question of changing the note of urgency away from the day to try and extend it over the event. And I think you can do that through scarcity of price and scarcity of inventory.
With all that being said, and doing some research on your company, 8Notch, it interests me because it feels like this is the absolute best time for you to be working on this concept and what you've come up with, because as this whole thing we're talking about has extended, you have a single household that is ordering multiple packages on multiple days all at the same time, within the same time frame. And one would think, oh, this one's going to deliver here, this one's going to deliver this day, this one will deliver in the morning, this one will deliver in the evening. And you have all this, just plethora of deliveries all hitting one household, but all at very different times. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and what you described is ultimately where we will get to. I think we're at the beginning stage of that in terms of, and it really was, the origin story of the company was born out of the pandemic, right? We were all at home and having everything brought to us. And so you saw that step function up in adoption of e-commerce that what was a 10-year growth in a 18-month time cycle, right? And we've stayed there and incremented on top of that. So, people who had never shopped online got everything brought to them. People who shopped some online had everything brought to them. People who had everything that brought to them bought more, right? And so there was this constant, flow of delivery trucks happening on a daily basis, and that hasn't changed. And so it was an issue that the founder and I were, if I go a little deeper on the origin story, we were playing golf, and the golf course we were playing on winds its way through a neighborhood, and we kept seeing delivery trucks go by. And he asked me, how often does that happen on your street? And I said, every day. I know my UPS delivery guy by name, right? Because I see him on the street every day, right? And I may offer him a bottle of water or a protein bar to keep him going because I know he's got a really, really tough job. But he said, do you think it's happening too much? I said, yeah, it seems disorganized, right? It seems like there's trucks flying around all over the place, sometimes multiple times a day, definitely multiple times a week. It doesn't seem sustainable. And I meant sustainable as we can do it forever. He heard me say it as sustainable in terms of the impact on the earth. And he said, I want to build a business around that. He said, I think there's a better way that if you can figure out, when things are going to be delivered, that you can organize to synchronize. And you can find a way to convince people that if they ship on a date and use the predictability of the network, that things will end up automagically into the back of the truck and in the driver's hands as he drops them off at the same time. So he may be stopping at your house 3 times a week instead of 5 times a week, but he's still delivering everything you had. So you're not asking the consumer to change their consumption pattern, right? You're just asking everybody to be a little bit more organized. And that was the premise. And he said, I bet if we do that we can unlock cost savings because the carrier is going to save a ton of money on this. And let's see if we can convince them to incent people to do this. And I bet if we can figure out how to measure what that stop, start, move, stop function is, there's a lot of carbon that you could find a way of eliminating if that stop never happened. And that's what we went after. And that was the premise that we went after is that, and again, it's a small item. If you can figure out how to not have a delivery truck stop in front of your house a few times a week, what's the impact associated? And what we found is the impact is massive. It's massive from a cost savings perspective. It's massive from an efficiency perspective. It's massive from a carbon avoidance. And I use that word carefully because it's never created, right? I'm not offsetting. I'm not reducing. I'm avoiding because I never created it.
So what kind of buy-in have you seen so far from the retailers, carriers, and what are you kind of anticipating for the growth pattern?
The first thing is we had to get a carrier partner, right? But this doesn't work if the carrier isn't on board because what we're asking them is to take the operational savings with that stop reduction and share it and use it as an incentive to reduce the retailer's cost structure and to pay us for creating that behavioral change. That was job one. And we went out and got a carrier partner. And that it was relatively easy to do. And unfortunately, I can't tell you which one it is, but you could guess and you'd be right half the time or wrong half the time. So it kind of gives you a perspective on scale, right? Because it'd be one of the first two that you thought of. And they said, we've been trying to do this, and we actually have done this to an extent, but we've never been able to get it at scale. We said, well, we think that we can solve the scale problem because we'll be a layer in between the carrier and the retailer, and we'll work with the retailer to do the adoption. And we'll make it so easy for them to onboard. And you'll make it so beneficial to them financially. And we'll all be able to share in the sustainability savings as it is that the story starts to write itself. Now, I would say that our adoption curve has not been as quick as we would like it. I think there's been a COVID hangover for a couple of years as people have tried to figure out what I want to do in this space and where I need to invest and what and how I approach it. We don't ask very much of the retailer from an IT perspective, but even that very, very small amount that we ask has been difficult. But we're in a different time frame now. I think we've broken the back on that. And I think people are starting to go, the COVID hangover is over and we're in a new version of normal. Well, let's figure out the new version of normal and take advantage of it. And what we're seeing is that the uptick is very, very strong because, and I think another valuable component that allowed us over the last year to year and a half is we did 70 to 80 simulations using retailer data for individual retailers to give them a perspective on the business case. And when they start to see the richness financially of the business case and the potential richness of the sustainability case as well, they go, this makes a lot of sense. I got to figure out how to get this in. The paradigm that we've had to overcome is because we're telling them when to ship means that it changes their thought process that the most important thing is to ship as fast as possible. And what we're telling them is schedule your shipment, use the predictability of the network, and still get it there inside the customer promise date that you committed to your customer. If you have 5 days, use the 5 days if there's value to be created. And if you have split shipments, we will show you a way that all of those shipments will show up at the same place. So if you're shipping from 3 different locations and it changes your approach to inventory, et cetera, we will find a way to ensure that all 3 of those shipments show up at the doorstep at the same time. And that's an unlock on the customer experience side and the customer satisfaction side, because it stops a phone call to say, where's my other stuff when that first package shows up. Mm-hmm. So I would say the adoption curve is still early, but I think the point is that everybody nods their head and says, I get it. And I got to figure out a way to get there.
So where does, or I guess mechanically, even though this is not a mechanical process, really, mechanically, how does it work for, as you said, the retailer? You're not asking that much of an IT push, but what are they actually having to do?
Yeah, and we offer an approach that we can integrate either at the order management level or at the warehouse management level, but it's always before it gets dropped to the warehouse floor before it gets picked, right? Because what we're doing is we are finding the date that it needs to ship on. We're providing that as an engineered ship date that goes into their system to then drop into their waiving approach. And that's when it would actually go through the pick pack process, picked up by the carrier and shipped at that point. Because we know the predictability of the network and we have insight into everything else that's either in flight in the network already, going to your address, I can start making connections, right? We call it the anchor shipment and the ride along, right? And we look to take those 2 packages and merge them in their journey, that when they get to the final sort hub, they end up in the same truck and they end up on your doorstep at the same time. If it was a split shipment approach, we might have multiple dates that we would give back to them in terms of, this is when you ship the anchor because it's the longest lead time item. And the shorter lead time items will tell you when to ship to connect with that through the network again, into the final sort hub, into the back of the truck, and then onto the doorstep. So all we're telling you is allow us to analyze your shipments. We'll tell you if we can find a match. If we find a match, we'll tell you when to ship it. If we can't find a match, move on, right? Keep going in terms of what you're doing. And we also use as much of the time as possible. We'll do a keep checking cycle for a period of time. And that's where we get into a negotiation with the retailer as to how comfortable they are holding an order before they'll ship. Some of them are very uncomfortable because they're worried about the customer calling and canceling. They're worried about scarce inventory moving, et cetera, because they've got a soft reserve on it. But I think that becomes the operationalization of it. And what we've seen is that as people grow more comfortable with it, they extend their timeline because capitalism wins, right? Because if they can extend their timeline, they can continue to potentially get the benefit from the carrier on that. And ultimately, and I think it was a question that you asked in the email that you sent me, is that if it's done right, it becomes a way to make their warehouse more efficient, because now it's not about a FIFO approach, right? It's a scheduled approach. And it allows them to really think about their warehouse management processes fundamentally different. We'll get there as well. But that's product 3, right? Product 1 is really around this notion of post-checkout world, being able to look at the order, to identify if there's an opportunity to match it to another package, either in flight or part of the same order, and then tell them when to ship it. And if they do that, they get the incentive. And if they do that, a very high percentage of the time, those packages will arrive at the same time.
I mean, this is something that people have probably already seen themselves to a degree. If you're an Amazon shopper, you see the offer sometimes to have everything delivered on the same day. Maybe you get an incentive yourself, the digital credit, that kind of thing. So it's almost expanding it out to bring in all these different retailers who are sending you things from different places.
Kevin, I would like you to do the rest of my podcast for me, because that's exactly the best. right. Is that Amazon has conditioned us in many ways, right? That they conditioned us that free and fast was the option, right? That they conditioned us that, when you get to checkout, that you should have the ability to control things, on your schedule. And now they're conditioning us to say, let me give you an option to feel better about the choice that you're making, because you can have everything delivered on the same day. Maybe it's not the most convenient day for you, but I'll tell you, it's the most sustainable day associated with it. And our goal is to take that same metaphor and bring it to the rest of the retail industry. That's what we're attempting to do more than anything else, is take advantage of Amazon conditions America to think one way. We will take advantage of that and bring that to the rest of the retailers.
So, I mean, the upshot is when you're walking through the neighborhood, looking at the traffic, so you're not seeing as many of the delivery trucks coming. You're not seeing the trucks come to your house 3 times in one day, for instance. It does seem like something that people would all be on board with.
I believe that, right? I mean, I think of myself like I'm a 58-year-old man who I did not know that I would be an eco warrior in stage 2 of my career, right? But I think I also recognize that, making small changes can drive big impacts, right? And if somebody tells me, a choice that I'm making is more sustainable and they can explain it to me why, which is, in this case, it's pretty explainable. Mike, you make a small, and in this case, we're not asking the customer in the analogy that we're at, ultimately that we'll get there, but being able to show to the consumer that choices that have been made on their behalf have driven, a significant carbon avoidance. I think people are going to get behind that. I think there's a rise in conscious consumerism, and I think people want to be spoken to like adults, right, in terms of the choices that are available to them. I know I'm much more conscious now of just about anything I buy in terms of, sourcing and the approach that they take. And I can tell you, every time I buy on Amazon, I'm looking to figure out how to combine packages, because I don't want the Amazon guy stopping here every day.
You mentioned carbon offsets a bit earlier, and the fact that, that used to be kind of a major way that companies would point to as being more sustainable. How has that evolved? And as you see, like the focus of companies maybe more willing to walk the walk than just talk the talk on carbon avoidance, lessening their environmental impact?
It's a really good question, because for a while it was the only option, right? Somebody said, and I still get it. I just booked an airline ticket the other day, and the airline, I will not mention them because I really like them, but I was annoyed that they asked this. Pay a few bucks more to offset your carbon. I'm not sure that's the right answer, right? I'm not sure asking the consumer to pay more versus making better choices. But is it part of the portfolio that a company can do to promote themselves in a more sustainable manner? I think it is. I think we should be figuring out ways to, repopulate the forest, and I think we should be finding ways of taking plastic out of the ocean. There's a company that I just recently purchased from that basically said, we'll donate, 1% of what you just bought. And there were 5 options that they offered at the end, right? In terms of, it was clean the ocean, forest conservation, something else. That felt authentic to me, because it was the company reinvesting. They may have already added it to their price structure, but they didn't ask me to do something, separate as a consumer. And I also think the greenwashing that companies have done is obviously tainted the entire carbon offset industry. But is part of the portfolio done the right way? I think it's a really important thing, because it's talking about investing back into the planet, right? Investing back into something that we all think should be done in some way, shape, or form. So I think done the right way, it's appropriate. Done the way that it's been done for the past 5 to 10 years, I'm not sure it works.
The showing of the impact, I think, does make a difference too, because as you said, there's always been some sort of nebulous nature to carbon offsets. You're just sort of taking it on faith that if you're throwing some money in there that something's actually being done.
And Kevin, it's actually been proven in many cases that the action that they promised never happened. Right. And that's where it gets really, really dicey. And that's when the entire initiative gets tainted. Right. It is when people use it for the wrong reasons.
So on the freight side of things, a lot of our customers, we use intermodal, which is a more sustainable freight mode compared to others. And, the industry is looking at these options here and really putting all of these things together, you would think is a pretty powerful message to be able to send that, we're shipping on the long haul side in a sustainable way, and then that final mile piece, which has been a challenge as well.
As I mentioned up front, this isn't my biggest area of expertise, and I'm sure there are bigger brains out there that have better ideas than I could ever come up with. But I always think about what led us to what we did and wondering if it's an analogy for any transportation-oriented, function, which was we wanted to figure out, what was the sustainable moment, right, that we could create. And we figured it out that it was when the delivery truck stopped out front and figured out the way of minimizing that as the place to start, to then be able to figure out how to backflush through the system to understand, are there other opportunities? I don't know if that's the same on the intermodal side. I mean, I don't know if it's thinking about it differently versus, how well can I pack it versus am I packing it for, one destination, right? And one destination is better than multiple destinations at the end of it. I don't know the answer to that, right? I mean, I think about the delivery truck here, that the carriers have done a great job of optimizing the routes and ensuring that truck is completely full and is dropping off everything along that route. But they couldn't figure out how to shorten the route and how to minimize the number of times that the route was actually driven, right? That's the piece that we are really, really focused on. Are there analogies there on the intermodal side? I don't know. It's not something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, but I guess I'd challenge us all. Do we think that everything is efficient, or are there inefficiencies that we can go after? And this was the dialogue that we had with the VC that invested in us, and the managing partner was like, he goes, I love what you're doing because you're taking something that we think is efficient, finding an inefficiency and driving better efficiency from it, and unlocking things in multiple ways, both cost and sustainability. He goes, that's the best of all worlds. Is there an option to do that on the intermodal side by thinking about the problem differently? I'm thinking there probably is. I just don't think I've got a brain big enough to do it.
Well, the last piece that, comes to mind here is there are obviously situations where carriers are having trouble recruiting staff, keeping staff around, having enough staff to be able to handle all of the deliveries, especially the upticks and everything in the holiday season. So theoretically, making everything more efficient and being able to, reduce the number of deliveries should be able to help them in that regard as well.
Yeah. I mean, look, I still don't know where everybody went, right? I mean, there's still a lot of people out there that could be working that they're choosing they're not, or they're social media influencers and we'll never get them back into the workforce, right? I don't know the answer on that one, right? But I think it's a real prevalent problem, right? That there's just not enough labor to be able to handle many of the situations that we had in the past. So how do we think about it differently, right? Because there are inefficiencies that I'm not sure that we've fully taken advantage of, because probably the economics didn't matter enough. Now they matter, right? And I think if you can add to the economics, and this is something a board member talks about, he goes, you're affecting a dual bottom line, right? You're affecting it financially and you're affecting it on the sustainability side. He goes, if we thought that way on many more things, what else might we unlock? And I think that's the piece that drives us, because to your point, we think we can go all the way back up to the retailer's warehouse and change their operations, because 15 to 20% of the time, or maybe it'll grow over time, it's a scheduled shipment. And there's no reason why that wouldn't mean that there's a reduction in terms of the staff that they need, because they're able to figure out 15 to 20% of the time how much volume that they need. This, back to my original question, my fulfillment partners loved and hated me, right? I kept them in business, but I also overwhelmed them, right? Because I was terrible at forecasting, absolutely terrible. Like Black Friday, I'd miss it by 50%. You miss Black Friday by 50%, you have crushed a warehouse for 2 weeks, right? Because it's going to take them forever undig from that. I think there are better ways of being able to figure that out. And I think the elongation that we talked about earlier of the holiday period is actually helping operations because it's pulling volume forward. And I think there's real value associated with that.
Well, great. Tell us where people can learn more about the Eighth Notch and where they can find more from you.
Yeah, so we have two primary hubs that we drive people to. One is our website, www.t8notch.com. On LinkedIn, we're The Eighth Notch, which at one point was a burger joint in Los Angeles. They've since gone under, so it's just us. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Mike Robinson in San Francisco, and then email me if anybody has any interest in what we're doing or learning more about what we're up to, mrobinson@t8notch.com. So all four of those, we'll figure out a way. But yeah, we are early in our history, but definitely believe that we have an outsized opportunity to make an impact.
Great. Thanks again for joining us, Mike.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us for InTek Freight and Logistics, the podcast. And thanks very much to Mike Robinson for taking the time to speak with us. Check out the links in the description to learn more about everything we discussed. Subscribe or follow now to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available. And you can help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen. If you have questions, email us at podcast@intechlogistics.com and visit intechfreight-logistics.com for more about what we do. For Shelley Austin, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll talk to you next time.